today we are diving really fascinating visual narrative based on Onur Atalay's sociological framework from his book Türk'e Tapmak, Worshipping the Turk. We are going to look at a pretty bold idea. What if humanity didn't just actually abandon religion in the modern era? What if we just transferred all our sacred concepts straight over into politics? It is a super compelling sociological lens, and today we are breaking down exactly how that transfer of faith happens. I want you to consider this quote from Malcolm Muggeridge for a second. He said, "We are told that after men stop believing in God, they believe in nothing. Actually, it is worse. They believe in everything." It's a profound paradox, right? And it perfectly sets the stage for our deep dive today. It totally challenges that every assumption that secularization leaves this blank slate in the human mind. Instead, the idea here is that human belief is this constant, enduring force. If you don't direct that powerful energy at the divine, it doesn't just evaporate. It inevitably finds a new earthly target to worship. Notice the merging elements here in the coverwork artwork for the book. You aren't seeing traditional religious figures with those classic angelic halos. Instead, you get this really striking combination. You've got the ancient symbol of the wolf, the heavy industrial smoke pouring out of modern factories, and the leader's face all kind of wrapped up together in a brand new halo of reverence. It's honestly a masterclass in visual communication. It silently, but incredibly powerfully, shows us how the symbols of industrialization and nationalism literally step in to replace the old gods. And that brings us to an absolutely crucial concept, the transfer of sacredness. So what is that? Well, it's the sociological and psychological process where the absolute authority, the rigid rituals, and that profound sense of awe that used to be strictly reserved for traditional religion, they get relocated. They're mapped right onto secular entities, like the nation or reason or the state. Atalay anchors his whole thesis on this idea, basically suggesting that the psychological throne of absolute belief, it just cannot remain empty in the human psyche. We always need something sitting on that throne. Let's see where this all started. The process really breaks down into two parts: disenchantment and re-enchantment. When Enlightenment thinkers, philosophers who focused purely on the material world, like Durkheim, when they removed God from the center of the universe, they didn't just leave a dark, empty void. They immediately re-enchanted the world. They elevated abstract concepts, things like nature and reason, to this divine, worship-worthy status. Reason literally became the new supreme being, coming with its own absolute authority and unquestionable dogma. And you have to see how incredibly fast this philosophical shift mutated. Just trace this timeline. We start in the 18th century with this purely philosophical God of reason. Then, boom, by 1789, as the revolution kicks off in France, we see the rise of the cult of the nation. Just 4 short years later, in 1793, there is a literal cult of reason established, complete with actual ceremonies taking place inside former cathedrals. And by 1794, you have Robespierre introducing the cult of the supreme being. Within just 5 years, philosophical concepts became mandatory civic faiths. The speed of that transformation is just staggering. Moving right along to Section 2, the civil religion of the French Revolution. The sheer scale of how they replicated religion here was astounding. The Jacobins, they were the radical political group leading to French Revolution. They didn't just change the laws. They painstakingly copy-pasted the actual architectural faith to engineer a parallel secular spirituality. For example, the famous Saint Genevieve Church in Paris was entirely secularized and turned into the Pantheon, basically a grand temple for the nation's new earthly deities. The Declaration of the Rights of Man, that was literally treated and taught as a new catechism. Traditional Catholic saints were actively swapped out for revolutionary martyrs. They even reset time itself. Imagine waking up and realizing the year isn't 1792 anymore. It's year 1. The Republican calendar replaced the birth of Christ as the starting point of history. It was a complete structural imitation of religion. Section 3. Civil and political religions. Let's break down the differences. Sociologically speaking, we can split these movements into 2 distinct camps to understand how they actually get enforced. On one side, we have Emil Durkheim's concept of civil religion. This is a bottom-up approach that acts like an organic cultural glue. Think of shared holiday traditions, or, singing the national anthem at a baseball game. It integrates society naturally. But on the flip side, we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, political religion. Now, This is a top-down engineered ideology that demands absolute, unwavering loyalty to the state. And as Atalay points out, it's this top-down, highly enforced model of Rousseau's that precisely describes the totalizing, state-led movements we saw during the interwar period. Which brings us to section 4, interwar. So, during the single-party period in 1930s Turkey, which was a time of rapid state-led modernizations and sweeping social reforms, religious structures were systematically rolled back from the public sphere. Now, naturally, this created a spiritual void. But remember our golden rule from earlier? That psychological throne cannot remain empty. So a very conscious, highly organized effort was made by the state to build a political religion. They needed a specific, engineered formula to fill that exact void and unify the newly formed republic. In that formula leads us to section 5. The three sacred of this brand new political religion was systematically built on three foundational steps: civilization, science, and nationalism. Now, as Atalay outlines in his book, these three concepts were elevated way beyond mere governmental policy goals. They were completely transformed into sacred dogmas. To question them wasn't just seen as political dissent. Within this new framework, questioning them was treated as outright heresy against the new political faith. Let's look at Pillar 1, civilization. This was viewed as a supreme moral destination. It wasn't just about, building better roads or adopting Western clothing. It was seen as this righteous, unquestionable path. And it came complete with its own secular temples, the people's houses. These were essentially state-run community centers where citizens gathered to absorb and practice the new civic culture. It even had its own martyrs, like Kublai. He was a secular teacher tragically killed by religious extremists. And his death was immediately elevated by the state to symbolize the ultimate sacred sacrifice for the civilized, secular ideal. Then we have Pillar 2, science. Echoing that materialist philosophy from the Enlightenment we talked about earlier, science wasn't just a method for rational inquiry here. It was the ultimate modern paradise. Science was presented as the supreme savior, this infallible force promising a utopian future built entirely on reason and positive knowledge. It effectively swapped out the promise of a spiritual afterlife for the guarantee of an earthly heaven driven by perpetual progress. Finally, Pillar 3, nationalism. This was the ultimate binding agent of the whole shebang. Just as the French revolutionaries replaced saints with the state, the absolute reverence that used to belong to the divine was transferred directly onto the nation itself, and by extension onto its leader. Nationalism was officially consecrated by the state to facilitate that exact transfer of holiness, permanently fusing political identity with spiritual devotion. But how do you actually make an entire population internalize all this new reverence? Well, first, through the new Turk. This was a massive, marathon 36-hour speech delivered by the Republic's founder over several days. It basically functioned as a foundational sacred text, a literal Genesis story for the new nation. Second, the widespread erection of statues and busts materialized the physical cult of the leader, giving the public tangible icons to revere in their day-to-day lives. And third, you had the highly aestheticized, meticulously choreographed ceremonies of the Republic's 10th anniversary. Those heavily solidified the state's new mythology. Every single poem recited, every parade marched, every monument unveiled. It was all deliberately designed to cement these new secular deities in the public mind. So, here is what I want to leave you with. If this sociological framework holds true, if that profound human need to worship, to hold something as absolute and unquestionable never truly vanishes, then what new idols are we silently constructing right now? Just look closely at the ideologies, the massive tech movements, or the deeply polarized political factions in our modern society. Which ones are we treating not just as ideas to be debated, but as sacred, unquestionable dogma? Keep questioning the structures around you, and I will catch you in the next Tahqiq.